Hello there. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Tate Redding, and I wanted to make this little video about the disease that I live with called diabetes. In the past, I had wanted to kind of make a pretty similar video, and I tried to write out this big script and read from it and have all these hard facts, but I figured that I might have a better or easier time just sitting in front of the camera and talking. Talking is something I'm pretty good at. It's something I do a lot of, and I feel that I'll have a better time really speaking my mind if it just comes straight from the heart, straight from the mind itself. So with that said, I'm going to be sharing a lot of different facts and things with you about diabetes that are going to kind of come from just my general knowledge of having lived with the disease for almost 14 years now. I am more than happy to produce and source proof of my facts or corrections if I later find that I am wrong, if that's a wanted thing. But for the most part, I'm pulling a lot of this just straight from my own head. So just to dive right in, we'll start with the easy question. What is diabetes? So basically, diabetes is when the body is unable to make any or enough of the hormone known as insulin. So when you eat food with carbohydrates or sugars in them, your digestive system breaks apart those sugars and delivers it to your bloodstream. It's insulin's job to take that sugar from your bloodstream and give it to all of the cells of your body in order for them to produce energy and continue working. Someone with diabetes doesn't make enough insulin and therefore doesn't get all of that sugar delivered to the cells of their body. So that sugar will kind of just sit in the bloodstream, and that's what's known as hyperglycemia or a high blood sugar. It's also very possible for there to be too little sugar in the bloodstream, perhaps from having too much insulin, and it took too much sugar out of the bloodstream, and therefore your body is not able to produce enough energy. That's what's known as hypoglycemia or a low blood sugar. That's why you hear people talk about low blood sugars and being really weak and really shaky and stuff like that. In fact, it is very possible for a perfectly healthy person to experience hypoglycemia. You may have experienced it yourself if you've gone too long without eating. Your blood sugar gets too low, you kind of start to feel really weak and really shaky, maybe a little sweaty, clammy. And then you go and eat something or you drink a little bit of apple juice or something, and then 10 minutes later, you're fine. That is a low blood sugar. That is hypoglycemia. Plenty of people deal with that all the time. There are some people who suffer from like a chronic hypoglycemia and they get low blood sugars all the time, but they are not necessarily diabetic. Their body is still producing insulin. What causes people to have that chronic hypoglycemia? I'm not really sure. Insulin is primarily produced in what are known as the beta cells of the pancreas. And so when a person has diabetes, it is specifically their beta cells of the pancreas that are malfunctioning. Just because a person has diabetes doesn't necessarily mean that their pancreas is entirely useless. Like my pancreas still is functioning and doing some other things. It's just not making me any insulin, which is kind of its primary purpose, but I still need it for everything else. It's entirely possible to live without a pancreas, and sometimes people who develop pancreatic cancer will have their pancreas removed, which is very unfortunate because they are then given type 1 diabetes for the rest of their life, and there's nothing that can really be done about that. Those people, I would assume, run into some other complications regarding some of the other hormones produced by the endocrine system that I don't necessarily run into. But like chronic hypoglycemia, I don't really know enough about that to talk about it right here. So, you've heard me say type 1 a lot. What exactly does that mean? Well, basically, there are two main types of diabetes. There's type 1 and type 2. These used to be known as, not too long ago, it used to be known as juvenile onset diabetes or adult onset diabetes, and that referred to type 1 and type 2 respectively. However, they were changed to type 1 and type 2 as a nomenclature because it's not entirely impossible for an adult to develop type 1, nor is it entirely impossible for a child to develop type 2. The main difference between these types is a person with type 1, such as myself, produces no insulin ever at all. Person with type 2 produces some insulin, but not necessarily enough to keep up with what their body needs. Type 1, at this current point in time, is incurable. That's just it. Type 2, however, is known to be reversible. And this can be done by means of, just exercise, proper diet, and good blood sugar control in the patient. But like I said earlier, type 1, in today's world, you're stuck with it for life. It doesn't go away. There are many, many people and researchers working to find a cure or create some sort of artificial or mechanical pancreas. However, it's not quite there. There's an ongoing joke in the diabetes community of people saying the cure is only 5 years away. And that is a running joke because people have been saying that the cure is 5 years away for the past 30 years. And we're still without a cure. So type 2 diabetes is very commonly found in people who are obese or overweight. And this is basically because their body is unable to keep up with their weight gain. And the more weight that you have, the more fat that you have on your body, the more insulin that your body needs to produce because it has more cells that it needs to distribute the sugars to from your bloodstream. So people who gain too much weight very often end up having type 2 diabetes. Now, being obese or overweight does not guarantee that you will have diabetes, but the more weight you gain, the higher your risk is. And this is also why type 2 is reversible by means of diet or exercise, because once you shed that weight off and your body is once again able to keep up with the insulin flow that you need, you no longer have type 2 diabetes. Sometimes you may hear people refer to type 1 as the bad type. Guess what? Diabetes is bad. I didn't say type 1 diabetes is bad. I said diabetes is bad. It sucks. It's terrible. It's hell. It's all bad. We're all diabetic. We all face this issue. Some of us are type 1, some of us are type 2. Now, that being said, type 1 is often less heard about and less talked about because we only make up a small percentage of diabetics. According to the CDC, it's an estimate that less than 10% of people with diabetes have type 1. So, I've heard numbers such as 7 or 8% and stuff like that in my past. It's a small portion of the entire diabetic population that has type 1 versus type 2, which is why you hear so many more things about type 2 than you do type 1. Now, this kind of causes some confusion because people hear a lot about type 2 diabetes and they kind of just blur that into diabetes in general. And so I've heard in the past, after telling people I have type 1 diabetes, I've heard people say in the past, well, try this diet, or you should exercise more, and maybe you can reverse it. My mom reversed hers by doing that. Guess what? Mine does not go away. Mine's not reversible. And that's important for people to know, because when people tell me, oh, well, if you do this, then maybe you can reverse it, then all that does is that reminds me that I actually can't reverse it. I know it's not their intention, and I know these people mean well, but that hurts me a little bit. So I guess it's a good time to kind of transition into some other misconceptions about diabetes. Because of the fact that there are so many type 2s, people tend to think that diabetes is caused, like just diabetes in general, is caused by being fat or eating too much sugar. So many people, and I'm going to continue getting this for a very long time, will learn that I'm diabetic and they will ask me, oh, did you eat too much sugar as a kid? And by God, do I want to slap those people sometimes. Again, I know they mean well, but you just, no, that's not true. No. I'm not mad at these people or anything. I'm annoyed by the lack of knowledge, the lack of resources that there are for people without diabetes to learn about diabetes. But hey, that's why I'm here right now. But the misconception comes from there are a lot of people who are overweight and deal with type 2 diabetes. Now, neither form of diabetes is caused by eating too much sugar. Eating too much sugar can sometimes lead to, most of the time lead to, weight gain. And weight gain can lead to type 2 diabetes. There is a relationship between sugar and diabetes in that way. However, it is not direct. So speaking of sugars and foods and eating things, there's a question that I get a lot, and a lot of type 1s and type 2 diabetics get this question a lot. And it happens when you're eating something such as a Snickers bar. And the person looks at the bar and they look at you and they go, "Can you eat that? Are you sure you should be eating that?" First of all, let us live our own damn lives. None of us are going to look at the Snickers bar and go, "Oh my God, oh, thank goodness you were here to remind me." We're not going to forget about our disease, okay? So please, never ask a diabetic, "Can you eat that?" or "Are you sure you should eat that?" Because guess what? Can we eat it? Yes, we can. We can eat whatever the hell we want. Anything. We can eat it. Some things are worse for us than others, such as Snicker bars or a bowl of pasta. I bet you didn't even know that. A bowl of pasta? Yeah, a bowl of pasta to a diabetic, it's the worst thing you could eat. The absolute worst thing you could eat. But people won't bat an eye when I'm sitting down eating a bowl of pasta, but I have a Snickers bar in my hand and they act like it's a loaded grenade. Active grenade, I guess is the term. Whatever. I didn't go to war. But yes, we are very sure that we can eat that. Should we be eating it? Maybe not. So about 34.2 million people in the United States suffer from some form of diabetes. That's something like 10%. That's a lot. That is 1 in 10 people. And it's because of this that a lot of the times when I tell somebody for the first time that I'm diabetic, they go, "Oh, my aunt's diabetic. Oh, my grandma's diabetic. My dad is diabetic." I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Like that just sucks for them. I'm sorry about that. But the reason they say that is I understand why people want to say that. They want to be like, "Hey, I feel for you. I know somebody else who is diabetic. And they go through this, that, and the other thing." But they're trying to sympathize as best as they can. And I respect that. However, it is a little bit annoying. So, speaking of your relatives who have diabetes, you may know somebody who perhaps lost a foot to diabetes. That's one of the common ones, is to lose a foot. People even joke about that. Or other, down the road complications such as going blind, losing your hearing, losing all the feeling in your feet or fingertips, or heart disease or kidney failure. Yes, these are all complications that can arise from diabetes. But anyway, you might know somebody who ran into some of these or one of these complications because of their diabetes. Don't tell me that your grandmother lost her damn foot because of her diabetes. How do you think that's going to make me feel? Think about that for a moment. How do you think that I'm going to feel when you tell me that someone else who has diabetes went blind? If you get to know me a little bit better, then maybe you can share this fact with me in a way that's not just like, "Oh, I know someone who has diabetes, that they're blind now." instead of it just being an anecdotal, we just met kind of thing, like, yes, down the road in our relationship, you're more than welcome to share that information with me. And I'll feel for you. I'll feel for your aunt, your grandmother, whoever. I will share my sorrow and I will provide you with comfort if that's what you're looking for. Because I say this because it happens. I say this because people just, that's what goes on in their mind. They hear diabetic and that's the first thing they think about is Aunt Debbie who lost her foot. And so they feel the need to say that. Don't say that. Don't say that. Add that filter in front of your mouth and just let it go. Let it go. I talk about long-term complications such as losing a foot or losing feeling in your feet or going blind or deaf or anything. Because these are very common and very fatal long-term side effects of having diabetes that you see a lot in some of the elderly folk right now, which is mainly because back in the older days, 50 years ago or so, diabetes care was not as good as it was today. And so people had a lot harder time controlling their blood sugars and maintaining proper blood sugar levels than I do now living in 2021. And so when you live for 40 years with diabetes and it's very rarely under control and in that normal blood sugar range, it causes a lot of different issues because this is a disease that is directly affecting your bloodstream. And your bloodstream goes throughout your entire body. So therefore, it can infect your entire body. The reason they talk about amputating feet and losing feeling in your feet is mainly because your feet are the farthest portion of your body away from your heart. And if you have complications maintaining your blood sugars, your heart will inevitably start having complications delivering the bloodstream or delivering the energy throughout your body, and your feet are the first ones to fall victim to that. So I'll talk a little bit about what a day is like for me in maintaining blood sugar control and stuff like that, and what I have to do every day for the rest of my life in order basically to live. So I mentioned earlier about that I have an insulin pump. I also have another piece of technology right here. This is a CGM, or a constant glucose monitor. And what that basically does is it takes a reading of my blood sugar every 5 minutes or so, and it feeds that information wirelessly to my pump. My pump, as you can see, has this cord on it, which is connected right now to my abdomen. This is not a permanent fixing. I change that out probably every 3 days or so, but there is a tiny plastic tube that just feeds into like my fat cells. And that is what delivers my insulin. There is, I can take it out and show you, a little reservoir of insulin that sits inside my pump. And then I can turn my pump on and I can tell it, okay, this is my blood sugar, this is how many carbs I'm eating. It'll do the math for me and say, this is how much insulin you need. And then I tell it to deliver the insulin. When I eat food, I need to know how many carbohydrates are in that food for the entire meal. And so I am a professional at checking nutrition labels and doing those little calculations in my head to figure out how many carbohydrates I'm eating. And based on that number of carbohydrates, I need to give myself a certain amount of units of insulin to cover for that food. The kind of like standard, the average is 1 unit of insulin for every 15 carbs. I think my ratio right now is 1 unit to every 12 carbs. However, that may not be my ratio next year. If I continue exercising and eating right, I could see that go to 1 to 15, or I could see that go to 1 to 20, and using less insulin is better. It's called having a higher insulin sensitivity, and you see that more in healthier people. People that don't have an insulin pump will use syringes or what's known as an insulin pen. I won't really talk about insulin pens or anything because I've never used them. However, what I can tell you about them is that they're basically mechanical syringes. So I used these for about 3 or 4 years until I was about, 15 or 16, and I finally got my insulin pump. But more or less, what you would do is you would draw up, 10 units of insulin, stick it in yourself, inject it. And you would have to do that every single time that you ate food, or if your blood sugar got too high for whatever reason, you would need to do a correction, and you might need to give yourself a couple units that way. For someone that doesn't have a constant glucose monitor, the way to measure your blood sugar is through one of these. And this is called a glucometer, or more commonly known in my household as the checker. Mine is a unit that when I take my blood sugar with this thing, it sends the information directly to my pump. Not a lot do that. It's from a specific company known as Medtronic. And so what I do, I'm just going to test it right now. I actually know for a fact that my blood sugar is pretty high right now, but I've already taken a correction, so that should be coming down soon. So take a test strip, stick it in there. You crank one of these bad boys out. And what's inside here? A little tiny needle. And then I'll stick it back up. And I just, boop. And now I'm bleeding. So take my blood sugar. Pardon me for licking my finger. That's not the proper way to do it. You're supposed to use an alcohol swab, but I think I'll be okay. So my blood sugar right now is 226, which is fairly high. I set my limit on my pump to alert me when my blood sugar is above 200. So right now it's a little high. I miscalculated on my lunch earlier, and I did not give myself enough insulin, and so therefore my blood sugar is too high right now. So after eating a meal, it's very important that I keep a close eye on how my blood sugars react to that meal over the next 2 hours or so. It generally takes about 15 minutes for the food you eat to start affecting your blood sugar, whereas insulin, which this stuff is known as fast-acting insulin, takes about 2 hours to fully work. It kind of works the whole 2 hours, like a slow start, and then somewhere in the middle is when it has its peak point, and then it kind of tapers off a little bit. But it is in your body, and it's affecting your blood sugars for about a 2 hour period. There are other kinds of insulins known as long-acting insulin, or like medium-acting insulin. Long-acting insulin works over a period of 24 hours, and people without insulin pumps need to take a single dose of that every day in order to maintain their blood sugars, because the body needs kind of a constant supply of insulin, because your blood sugar is like basically rising 100% of the time. So I have an insulin pump, and so what my insulin pump does is it gives me a very, very tiny amount of fast-acting insulin every 5 minutes or so, based on my blood sugar readings or my sensor readings. And it's such a minuscule amount that it would be impossible to deliver an amount that small with a syringe, as well as extremely wasteful. So that's why people use long-acting insulin, and they give themselves somewhere from like 20 to 30 units every single day of that long-acting insulin to help keep the blood sugars from rising too much during periods of fasting or, overnight especially. The medium-acting insulin, it's not very commonly used. It works over a period of 12 hours. generally. So it can be used in place of a 24-hour insulin, but using it twice a day instead of once a day. But it's just not very common. In America, there is a lot of controversy surrounding insulin because basically the recipe for insulin has not changed in over 25 years. However, the price has gone up thousands of percent. And without insurance, this one vial of insulin that I just held up can be worth $400, $500, $600. And those vials last us about 2 weeks generally. There is a brand of medium acting insulin that Walmart sells more or less over the counter for like $25 or so, which in the world of insulin is ridiculously cheap. However, it's not really the safest thing to just go out and use. Like you need to have a fast acting insulin, and those are the ones that are produced by big companies such as Eli Lilly and some other ones that I don't remember the name of. That those are the ones that in America the prices are spiked up beyond any sort of fairness, and people will pay hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars for their insulin in America if you don't have insurance. I am fortunate enough that I have health insurance, and it's a very, very good health insurance. Granted, I do have to pay a very high monthly premium, more expensive than my car payments. But when I go to buy my insulin, I look at the receipt and it says something like, insurance paid $1,200. You paid $50. Not many people are very fortunate in that. And there have been many cases of people who find themselves suddenly without health insurance and unable to afford insulin, which they literally need to survive every day. And then they go on to rationing their insulin, which is just downright deadly and very sad to have to do. To have to say, okay, this is exactly how many units I can use in a day, and it's usually a very small number, leaving them unable to eat a lot of food. Low blood sugars are one of the worst feelings in my world. Very shaky, very low energy, just clammy, and just want to lay down on the bed and breathe heavily until it all goes away. And you may hear the term hypoglycemic attack, and that is basically when the blood sugar gets to a dangerously low point and it feels extra terrible. Blood sugars of 65 or 70 like that are usually sometimes pretty manageable. Like, it feels kind of bad, but I can still walk around, I can still do stuff. But then you get to those 40s, 50s. I think the lowest I've ever recorded my own blood sugar was at 29, and that's when just walking to the kitchen feels like climbing a mountain, and it just becomes so difficult to do anything at all other than just lay there and sweat. And it just is really, really very terrible. On the other hand, with high blood sugars, you tend to get very clammy. You can also get a little sweaty. Me personally, especially over the past couple of years, I get extremely irritable. My fiance can definitely attest to that. She gets pretty annoyed with how irritable I can get sometimes, to the point where I feel myself getting a bit needlessly angry at something and I'm like, my blood sugar must be high. And I check it and lo and behold, I'm at 250 or something. Now, if a blood sugar gets too low, it can cause the person to pass out or start seizing. And that's when these guys come in handy. These are emergency glucagon kits for low blood sugars. And basically what this is a very large needle with a liquid substance in it, and then this little vial that has a powder in it. And you mix the powder with there's instructions in there, but you mix the powder with the liquid, and then you inject the mixed substance into the affected diabetic. This isn't something that I would use on myself. This is something that an EMT or anybody can use on me in the case of me passing out. It doesn't need to go in the bloodstream. Most often they say jab them in the thigh or in the butt, just anywhere that has the most like fatty tissue. And usually, more often than not, this is kind of like the Narcan of diabetics. Like you come back in a couple of minutes. I've never had one of these need to be used on me. I have had one instance of a low blood sugar causing me to have a seizure, and I was hospitalized. Long story short, I didn't have my tattoo, and I wasn't wearing a medical alert bracelet, so they didn't know that I was diabetic, and so they didn't use one of these on me. But luckily, I eventually, came to. I had something like an orange Gatorade moments before passing out, thinking it was going to help me, but it was already too late for me. So why am I doing this? Why am I sitting in front of a camera and more or less ranting to you? And I think that's because these misconceptions that I talked about earlier are kind of annoying for us to hear. It's just annoying. Like I've said a couple of times already, I know that the people that are saying these annoying phrases and annoying questions, they mean well. Their intention is not to hurt. I understand that. Because of the lack of awareness, this person may be unintentionally hurting my feelings or somebody else's feelings, while their intention is good. And unfortunately, you don't get to decide whether or not you've hurt somebody. If there were more awareness around diabetes and more people such as myself just talking about it, then there would be less of those questions. There'd be less of hurt feelings, and there would probably be a bit more truth being spread. There's a lot of false truths being spread, especially among social media, of people who may claim that this substance, essential oil, food, or whatever, reverses diabetes. Don't believe any of that. It's all false. It's all salesman tactics. It's all snake oils. And to use my disease as your strategy to rip people off makes me pretty sick. You might see a Facebook post being shared around that talks about one that we joke about among the diabetes community is cinnamon, because there is this weird thought that cinnamon reverses diabetes, and it just doesn't. But there's still this misinformation being spread among Facebook groups or Instagram posts of this, that, and the other, from whether it's influencers or just moms press and share. It's just not true, and that kind of thing really needs to stop. So the only thing that can reverse type 2 diabetes, and only type 2 diabetes, is proper diet and exercise and maintaining a good control over your blood sugars, which takes your own input a lot of the time. And also, with that said, diet and exercise is personal. What works for me may not work for somebody else. And what works for somebody else may not work for me. There is no one diet that can cure diabetes. There is no one exercise routine that can cure diabetes. It's just whatever works best for you. If you find a diet that works for you and it's one that you can stick to and one that you can lose weight on and one that you can maintain better blood sugar controls on, then that is the diet for you. So spread that if you see any posts like the ones I mentioned on any sort of social media. Don't spread lies. Another good reason to spread awareness is because a lot of people might know somebody with diabetes but don't care enough to learn about it. And if you like that person, if you respect that person, then I think you should. And don't just stop at diabetes. If you know someone who is autistic, if you know someone who has cancer with MS or addiction, learn about it. Become aware, research, ask them even. It's a highly, highly respectful thing to do that shows that you don't just care about yourself, you care about these other people too. Why is it so respectful to be aware of someone's disease or someone's hardship? Is because when you know more about it, they feel more comfortable. Don't get me wrong, I love spreading awareness and I love talking about my disease and stuff like that. But I find that how often I need to do it, it kind of sucks. And if I had to do it less, I know that'd be great. If I ran into people who said, I know this, that, and the other about diabetes, and it was actually true, that'd be amazing. So awareness is just a great thing. Like I said, it doesn't matter what disease it is. If you know someone with any sort of lifelong ailment, get to know it. Research it or ask them about it. Get to know them. It's a great, great thing that you could do to be a selfless person. Because, not to get too emo on you, but diabetes eats your soul. Every day dealing with this, every day having to make hundreds of more decisions and all this extra stress, year after year after year, it starts to really weigh down on you. And I've had so many depressive episodes where I just cry because I just don't want to do it anymore. Sometimes I just want to give up. Sometimes I just, I wish I could just have just one day without it. I remember what it's like not to deal with this. In a way, I sort of envy the people who are diagnosed at infancy or when they were too young to have formed any real memories. Because I can think back to when I could eat freely and not worry about it. But more than half my life now, I've had to deal with it. And it's hard. It's really hard. But I choose not to give up. And I choose to keep fighting. And I choose to live. So I guess that's all I really have to talk about today. If there is a want for it in the future, I will definitely make some other videos going into a bit more detail about specific topics, providing more hard factual evidence. I will make some scripted ones or whatever, just to really kind of be a bit more professional about it. Today, I just kind of wanted to, like I said, sit, talk, rant. And if you've made it to the end part, here, then I thank you. Um, what you're doing is a great thing to learn and to become aware. Maybe you're watching this because you know someone or are close to someone who suffers from whether it be type 1 or type 2 diabetes. And I know that they would thank you too for doing this research, if you want to call it that, or just wanting to learn more. So, from myself, thank you. Have a great day.